A line of customers stood silent. Tellers stopped typing. Even the security guard by the door shifted uneasily. Every pair of eyes turned toward the center of the hall, where an elderly woman, her clothes faded, her shoes worn, her posture slightly bent with age, handed her bank card across the counter. The manager, a man in his 40s with a slick suit and too much pride in his smile, threw back his head and laughed. His voice carried across the marble walls. "I'll pay double," he declared loudly, tapping the card against the desk for everyone to hear. "If this woman even has a balance." Laughter rippled among some employees. A few customers covered their mouths, others smirked openly. To them it was entertainment. To her it was humiliation. The old woman did not laugh. She stood quietly, her wrinkled hands folded, her tired eyes calm yet heavy. She did not protest. She did not defend herself. She simply waited. And at that very moment, the tension in the room thickened. What did she know that they did not? Before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. This story will show you something you won't believe. The manager leaned across the counter, still grinning. "Ma'am," he said with mock politeness, "are you sure you even want me to check? I wouldn't want to embarrass you more than this." His colleagues chuckled again. One whispered, "She probably doesn't have a dime." Another added, "Look at those clothes. She's wasting our time." The woman's face remained steady. She had heard words like this before, on the street, at the market, even from neighbors. But tonight, inside this bright, echoing bank, those words cut deeper. Still, she stood with dignity. "Please," she said softly, "check the account." Her voice was gentle, but there was something in her tone that unsettled him. He blinked, as if for the first time noticing that she wasn't nervous. She wasn't ashamed. She was certain. He shrugged it off, turning to the growing line of customers. "You see," he boomed, raising her card like a trophy. "Another one who thinks she's important. I'll prove it. Let's see how much she has, if anything at all." Murmurs spread across the room. Some customers leaned forward eagerly, ready to witness her embarrassment. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing cruelty. The old woman lowered her eyes. She said nothing more. But inside, her heart beat steady, like someone who knew a secret no one else expected. The atmosphere grew heavy, as if the building itself held its breath. The manager swiped the card with a flourish, still smirking. He hadn't seen the storm that was coming. The manager's laughter lingered in the air, bouncing off the tall marble walls of the bank. His grin stretched wide, sharp with arrogance, while he held the woman's bank card between two fingers as though it were worthless. He turned to the nearest employee, a young teller who avoided eye contact. "Watch this," he said, loud enough for half the hall to hear. "I'll make it quick. She's wasting everyone's time." The teller nodded nervously but said nothing. She had seen him act this way before, always loud, always ready to humiliate. Yet something about this moment felt heavier. The old woman, fragile in her posture but steady in her silence, didn't fit the usual pattern. "Look at her shoes," the manager added cruelly, tilting his head toward the floor. "They're falling apart. And that coat, what is it, 30 years old?" A ripple of laughter came from a corner where two clerks stood whispering. Customers began whispering too. Some smirked, others leaned to one another with raised brows, as if silently agreeing with the manager's judgment. The woman didn't look down at her coat. She didn't answer. Her eyes, tired but calm, stayed on the counter. She wasn't there for their approval. She had come for her own reasons, and she would not be moved. The manager leaned closer, lowering his voice to her alone now. "You should go," he said mockingly, his breath thick with disdain. "Spare yourself the embarrassment. I'd hate to announce to the entire bank that you don't even have a single cent." She blinked once, slowly, then replied in a voice quiet but firm, "Check the account." The words, though soft, cut through the noise like a blade. Conversations in the room faltered again. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something unseen was pressing back against the manager's arrogance. But he only smirked wider. "As you wish," he said. He straightened his tie, puffed his chest, and turned dramatically toward the nearest computer terminal. "Everyone gather close if you want to see the truth. This won't take long." A murmur spread across the bank. Some customers leaned on their elbows, eager for the show. Others looked away, uneasy with the cruelty but unwilling to speak. The security guard by the door crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. He too had seen this play out before, but never with this much spectacle. The woman's hands rested on the counter, thin and wrinkled, veins raised beneath the skin. They trembled slightly, not from fear but from age. She breathed evenly, her expression calm, as if she had lived through far greater humiliations than this one. The manager glanced at her again. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw something in her eyes, something unshaken, something steady, almost challenging. But he dismissed it with a scoff. "Old women," he muttered under his breath, "always pretending to be more than they are." He waved over another employee, a younger man with a clipboard. "You'll want to witness this," he said loudly. She insisted, "so let's give her what she asked for." The younger man nodded hesitantly, standing at his side. His eyes flicked toward the woman with a trace of pity, but he didn't dare speak. The power in the room belonged to the manager. The customers were now watching openly. A mother hushed her child so she could hear. A businessman with a briefcase leaned forward, curiosity etched into his face. Even those who had entered the bank for ordinary errands sensed something unusual. The manager tapped the desk twice with her card and raised his voice again. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's not waste time. I'll show you exactly what this poor woman is worth. Probably less than the paper this card is printed on." A few chuckles answered him, but the air carried more tension than amusement. People were entertained, yes, but unease rippled beneath the laughter. The woman didn't flinch. Her eyes remained on the counter, her breath measured, her silence heavier than his insults. The manager slid her card into the machine with exaggerated slowness, glancing sideways at his audience as though they were his personal theater. The machine beeped faintly, waiting for the next command. He tapped the keys with smug flourish, each stroke loud, deliberate. Behind him, whispers rose. "Why doesn't she just leave? She must be crazy. Imagine coming here with nothing. Shameless." But others whispered differently. "She looks so calm. What if she actually has money? Don't be ridiculous." The conflicting murmurs swirled around the hall, pressing down like a storm waiting to break. The manager turned back to the woman with a crooked smile. "Still want me to continue?" She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time. "Continue," she said. The word was quiet, yet it echoed louder than his boasting, striking like a drumbeat in the uneasy silence. For the first time his grin faltered, only for a heartbeat. Then he straightened again, determined to prove her wrong. "Very well," he said louder than before, as if trying to bury his own hesitation. "Let's show everyone the truth." His fingers hovered over the keys. The machine blinked, waiting. The crowd leaned closer. The old woman stood perfectly still. And the next moment, the one where the screen would light up with her reality, hung over the bank like thunder about to break. Outside the cold walls of the bank, the woman's life passed in quiet obscurity. She lived on the edge of a busy neighborhood where noise never ceased, yet no one ever noticed her. To the people rushing by, she was just another elderly woman in worn clothes, carrying her modest shopping bag, walking with small but steady steps. At the market she was invisible. Shoppers brushed past her, reaching over her shoulder without apology. Vendors assumed she could not afford anything beyond the cheapest produce. When she asked for bread, they pointed her to the stale basket in the corner. No one asked her name. No one cared to know her story. Her apartment was small and plain. The wallpaper had faded, the furniture carried scratches from decades of use. Neighbors sometimes whispered that she must be poor. After all, who would live in such simplicity unless they had no choice? But inside those four walls, she found peace. She brewed tea slowly, savoring the steam that rose into the air. She kept notebooks filled with handwritten numbers, records of every coin, every small investment made over the years. The world saw poverty. She saw discipline. Every morning, she walked the same path to the park. She fed the pigeons with crumbs of bread others would have thrown away. Children played nearby but never asked her name. Parents called them back, warning, "Don't bother the old woman." She smiled anyway. She had grown used to being invisible. Years earlier, when she was younger and her back was straighter, she had been mocked in other ways. At work, colleagues dismissed her ideas, assuming she was too simple to contribute. When promotions came, she was overlooked. When invitations were handed out, hers never appeared. And yet, through it all, she saved. Quietly. Consistently. A little here, a little there. She bought small plots of land when others laughed at her frugality. She placed coins into accounts that grew unnoticed by anyone but her. Her clothes grew older, her shoes wore thinner, but her fortune grew quietly, hidden like a seed beneath soil. She never flaunted it. She never told a soul. Because she had learned something most people never did. Appearances deceive. One evening, a neighbor knocked on her door, asking for help with rent. The woman handed her a few bills with a kind smile. The neighbor took the money quickly, muttering thanks, but as she left, she whispered to another tenant in the hallway, "She lives so poorly. I doubt she'll last the year." The words didn't wound her. She had heard worse. She only closed the door softly and returned to her tea. To the world, she was a shadow, a background figure in the bustle of life. But to herself, she was something more. A survivor, a planner, a woman who had turned hardship into strength. And now, standing in that bank, mocked by a man half her age, she carried all those years within her. Every humiliation, every dismissal, every careless judgment had built a wall inside her heart. A wall that could not be broken by laughter or arrogance. The crowd at the bank could not see it. The manager could not feel it. But behind her silence lived decades of resilience. The invisible woman was about to become unforgettable. Back inside the bank, the atmosphere thickened with unease. Customers shifted in their seats. The rhythmic clicking of keyboards had stopped entirely. Only the low hum of the air conditioner remained as the manager, still holding the elderly woman's card, basked in his moment of attention. He raised his voice deliberately, as though the woman were not even present. "Ladies and gentlemen, this will be quick. We'll put an end to the suspense. This poor woman insists she has money, so let's prove it." His words carried smugness, heavy and sharp. Some customers chuckled, though fewer than before. The laughter sounded forced now, fragile in the heavy silence. The woman's frail frame looked small at the counter, yet her presence was strangely steady. Her eyes did not wander. She did not look at those laughing. She focused only on the man in front of her, the one determined to strip away her dignity. The manager gestured to another employee across the hall. "Come here, you'll want to see this." The young clerk approached hesitantly, his eyes darting between the old woman and the floor. He didn't want to be there, but defying the manager wasn't an option. "Watch closely," the manager continued, his grin spreading. "When I say she has nothing, you'll see I wasn't exaggerating." The old woman's lips parted slightly. Her voice was quiet, yet it pierced through the noise of his arrogance. "Please," she said, "do your job." The clerk glanced at her, startled by the calm tone. The manager laughed at the remark, shaking his head. "Do my job? Fine. Let's give you your spectacle." He tapped the machine, drawing the crowd in closer. A businessman with a briefcase edged near, curiosity on his face. A young mother clutched her child's hand tighter, whispering, "Don't stare." But the child's eyes were wide, locked on the fragile figure of the woman. The manager swiped her card again, tapping the keys dramatically as though performing on a stage. He turned to the audience, raising his brows. "Any guesses? Should we expect $10? Maybe 20? A man in line muttered, "She probably owes the bank instead." A few chuckles followed, but the sound was uneasy. The woman's expression never changed. Her wrinkled hands rested on the counter, still trembling from age, not fear. She waited, breathing slowly. The manager leaned in close to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You'll regret this," he said. "They'll all laugh when the screen shows 0. Her reply was steady, her tone cutting through his cruelty. "Then let them see." He blinked, unsettled by her certainty. For a flicker of a moment, his smile faltered. But he quickly covered it with another loud laugh, throwing his shoulders back. "Very well," he shouted louder than before. "Let the entire bank be witness." The room held its breath. He entered the last digits, his fingers hovering above the final key. The machine blinked, waiting. Behind him, whispers spread. "She's crazy. No one would come dressed like that with millions. She must be confused." But another voice cut through softly, "Look at her. She's not nervous." That observation silenced a few. The manager hesitated for only a second, then pressed the key with a flourish. The machine whirred, loading. All eyes fixed on the small glowing screen. The clerk beside him leaned forward. The businessman's brow furrowed. Even the security guard shifted his weight, his arms unfolding slowly. The manager straightened his jacket and grinned. "Prepare yourselves," he announced, turning back to the woman. "This will be quick." The woman lifted her head slightly, her eyes calm, her lips curved just barely, not into a smile, but into the quiet expression of someone who already knew what was coming. The screen flashed once. Numbers began to load. The silence was unbearable. No one moved. No one breathed. And in that heavy stillness, the confrontation reached its breaking point. The numbers on the screen began to load, slow, deliberate, merciless. And as the bank held its breath, her mind slipped away from the fluorescent lights and tiled floor, back to rooms lit by single bulbs and mornings that began before sunrise. She had grown up in a one-room house where the roof leaked in winter. When it rained, she and her mother moved pots across the floor like chess pieces, catching the drips, counting the seconds between them. Her father left early and came home late, his hands cracked from labor, his temper shorter than his pay. She learned quickly that money was not noise, it was silence. It made no announcement when it arrived. It vanished without apology when it left. At 16, she took her first job sweeping a bakery. She arrived when the sky was still purple, when ovens roared like engines and the smell of yeast filled the air. She earned coins, not bills. She hid them in a jar beneath the floorboard, wrapped in cloth, so mice wouldn't chew the paper and siblings wouldn't spend it on sweets. She did not buy new shoes. She learned to mend the old ones with thread. At 20, she became a cleaner in an office building downtown. She moved from desk to desk after hours, wiping fingerprints off glass, taping split folders, straightening chairs for men who never knew her name. She learned the rhythm of elevators and the echo of empty halls. She learned that the most powerful rooms looked ordinary when everyone had gone home. There was a time she thought life might soften. She married a man who laughed easily and danced clumsily in the kitchen. The two of them shared a single umbrella and believed it was enough. When bills rose and wages fell, he took extra shifts and she took side work, hemming skirts, fixing zippers, sewing curtains from fabric others threw away. They told themselves it was temporary. Then illness came like winter without spring. He faded faster than the doctors predicted. She sold the umbrella to pay for medicine and walked in the rain. Grief did not make her reckless. It made her precise. She counted everything: hours, coins, steps, breaths. She wrote numbers in a notebook with a stub of pencil, each digit pressed into the paper as if weight alone could keep it from blowing away. An elderly neighbor, a retired accountant with a kind stutter, noticed her lists. He taught her compound interest at a kitchen table stained with tea. He drew circles around dates and arrows through months, showing how patience turns into profit. He did not speak of luck. He spoke of discipline. He showed her how pennies become dollars, how dollars become choices, and how choices become quiet freedom. He died before spring, leaving her his dog-eared booklet on savings and a note. Keep going. Time is your ally. She kept going. She bought her first government bond when other women bought dresses for a holiday. She celebrated not with champagne but with sleep. Years later, when inflation surged and the news shouted fear, she did not shout back. She held. She learned to separate noise from knowledge. She chose plain food and long walks over restaurants and taxis. When coworkers laughed at her patched coat, she smiled. She knew a coat is a coat. A percentage point is a door. There were setbacks. A market crash that made headlines. A landlord who raised rent without warning. A cousin who borrowed and never returned. She endured each without theater. She took a second job as a caregiver, sitting beside the beds of strangers in the blue hours of night, cooling fevers with damp cloths, listening to stories that wandered like rivers. The work paid little. It paid enough. In middle age, she bought a sliver of land at the edge of a growing town, a place no one admired. The soil was more rock than earth, the fence a suggestion rather than a barrier. People called it foolish. She called it potential. Years later, a road curved near it. A developer knocked. She did not haggle with anger. She negotiated with numbers. She sold the strip that fronted the new road and kept the piece that faced the sunrise. The sunrise, she had learned, appreciates daily. A bank teller once asked why she never upgraded her account. She answered with a polite nod and no explanation. Privileges came with fees. Fees were crumbs. Crumbs belonged to her pigeons. She volunteered sometimes quietly without schedule. She stocked shelves at a pantry when newspapers said the economy was strong and the line at the door said otherwise. She slipped envelopes under doors when rent was due for neighbors who had fallen behind. She never signed her name. Charity, she believed, is a private language. With the years, the city changed its skin. Glass towers rose where warehouses slept. Cafes replaced laundromats. Opinions got louder, gratitude got quiet. She lived as she always had, patching, saving, walking. She visited the library on Tuesdays, sat by the radiator in winter, and read about markets the way sailors read about tides. She learned to recognize storms before they reached shore. People mistook her choices for misfortune. They saw a threadbare coat and believed it told her whole story. They did not see the notebook behind the cupboard, the certificates in the envelope under the mattress, the account that compounded while gossip exhausted itself. Sometimes she imagined telling them. Not to boast, but to correct the cruel arithmetic by which strangers calculate another's worth. She never did. Wealth, like grief, taught her the dignity of silence. And yet, injustice still stung. Not when a clerk rolled her eyes. Not when a teenager snickered on the bus. But when authority mocked the vulnerable in public. When power used a microphone to belittle a whisper that she could not abide. So she stood in the bank that morning with the certainty of a ledger that had been balanced carefully across decades. She brought no witnesses, no lawyer, no friend to record the moment. She brought a card, a number, and a lifetime of proof. Back in the present, the fluorescent lights sharpened to focus. The machine hummed. The manager's finger hovered above a key, theatrically confident. Customers leaned in until their reflections trembled on the monitor's dark surface. Her heartbeat did not race. It kept time the way it always had, measured, patient, unafraid of waiting. She thought of the neighbor's note. Keep going. Time is your ally. She thought of her husband's laugh in the kitchen and the way grief had taught her to listen for quiet victories. She thought of the land, the bonds, the Tuesdays at the library, the envelopes without signatures. She thought of the pigeons pecking at crumbs that others would have thrown away, finding a feast where the careless saw trash. Let them look at the coat, she told herself. Let them weigh cloth instead of character. The screen would speak a different language. The machine chirped. The manager straightened. The clerk swallowed. The room condensed to a single point of light. She lifted her chin by a fraction, no more, and faced the numbers that had been gathering behind her for a lifetime, ready at last to step into view. The bank grew colder, though the air had not changed. Customers leaned in their chairs, their murmurs reduced to faint whispers. All eyes clung to the counter where the manager prepared his show. He slid the old woman's card between his fingers like a magician about to perform a trick. His smirk widened, his voice rising with theatrical arrogance. "Watch closely," he declared. "It takes just 1 second to know the truth." The clerk at his side shifted uncomfortably. The security guard moved closer, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor. Even the child who had fidgeted earlier now sat still, sensing the weight of what was about to unfold. The old woman stood silent. Her posture was slightly bent, her shoes worn, her coat faded from years of use. Yet in that moment, she seemed taller than the marble pillars that surrounded her. Her silence was not weakness. It was authority. The manager inserted her card into the machine with deliberate slowness, stretching the anticipation. The device beeped, a small sound that echoed like a hammer strike in the tense silence. He looked over his shoulder at the crowd, eyebrows raised. Ready to see what nothing looks like? A few customers chuckled nervously. Others said nothing, their eyes locked on the glowing screen. The manager typed with exaggerated flair, each keystroke loud, deliberate, almost mocking. He tapped the keys as though hammering nails into her dignity. But the woman did not move. Her wrinkled hands rested gently on the counter, trembling only with age, not fear. "Password?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but clear. She spoke the digits as if reciting a prayer. Numbers she had whispered countless times over the years, numbers that carried her history. The manager repeated them loudly, exaggerating every syllable so the crowd could hear. "Did you catch that?" he mocked, laughing at his own cruelty. No one laughed back. Not now. The silence had shifted. People sensed something beneath her calm. Something they couldn't explain. The clerk glanced at the manager, then at the woman. He frowned slightly, as though wondering which of them held the real power. The machine processed her information. Its screen glowed pale blue, the cursor blinking impatiently. The manager folded his arms, tapping his foot with impatience. "This won't take long," he muttered, but his eyes flickered with unease. He was used to immediate gratification, instant confirmation of his mockery. Yet the machine seemed to stall, dragging the moment into eternity. The old woman closed her eyes. She inhaled deeply, then released the breath slowly. To those watching, it looked like serenity. To her, it was memory, the long nights, the saved coins, the years of being overlooked. She knew the balance was there. She had built it one brick at a time. Behind her, whispers rose again. Maybe she really has something. No. Look at her coat. But she doesn't look afraid. The manager's smirk faltered for just a second. He coughed, straightened, then puffed his chest. "Don't get excited," he said to the crowd. "It's nothing. You'll see." The cursor blinked once more, then the screen flickered. The machine whirred as though gathering its strength. The clerk leaned forward, his breath shallow. The businessman with the briefcase adjusted his glasses, trying to catch the first glimpse. Even the security guard, arms crossed, tilted his head for a clearer view. The manager's fingers hovered above the final confirmation key. He held the moment hostage, savoring the silence, desperate to remain in control. "Here we are," he he said, his voice strained but loud. "The grand finale. Prepare yourselves for a number so small you'll miss it if you blink." He pressed the key. The machine beeped once. The cursor vanished, and the screen prepared to reveal the truth. The old woman opened her eyes. "Come, certain." The air inside the bank felt heavy enough to crush. Then the balance appeared. The screen lit up. For a moment, the glow seemed ordinary, just numbers on glass. But then the digits sharpened into view, long, heavy, undeniable. Balance: 7,462,000.00. Millions. The room froze. Every sound disappeared. Even the humming machines, the shuffling feet, the faint music from someone's phone, all of it seemed to vanish in the weight of that single number. The manager's grin collapsed. His jaw slackened. The color drained from his face as sweat broke along his temple. He blinked once, twice, as if hoping the digits might vanish if he looked again. But the numbers remained, glowing brighter the longer he stared. The clerk at his side gasped softly. He stepped back, clutching the clipboard to his chest. "It can't be," he whispered, though the words were drowned in the silence. A businessman near the front of the line leaned forward, his eyes wide. A young mother held her child tighter, murmuring, "Look." Even the security guard by the door dropped his stern expression, his eyes flickering between the screen and the old woman who stood so still, so calm. The old woman did not smile. She did not gloat. Her hands remained folded, trembling faintly with age but steady in purpose. She simply waited, as though this was no surprise at all. The manager stumbled, his voice cracking as he tried to recover. This must be a mistake," he stammered. He tapped the machine again, re-entering the sequence, desperate for a different outcome. But the same digits appeared, bold and undeniable. Balance: 7,462,000.00. A murmur spread across the bank. First soft, like the rustle of wind through leaves. Then louder, rising like a tide. People whispered to one another, pointing, shaking their heads in disbelief. "She has millions. All this time. And we thought." The manager's chest tightened. His heart pounded wildly against his ribs. He glanced at the crowd, their eyes no longer mocking but sharp, condemning. The smirk he had worn so proudly only minutes before now marked him as a fool. His mouth opened but no words came. For once he had nothing to say. The old woman finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes, pale but piercing, met his directly. She didn't need to speak. The weight of her silence was heavier than any lecture, sharper than any insult. It cut through his pride, leaving only shame behind. The clerk turned toward her, his voice low, reverent. "Ma'am," he said softly, "would you like to make a withdrawal?" She shook her head gently. "No. I only wanted it checked." The simplicity of her answer struck harder than the millions glowing on the screen. She had not come to boast. She had not come to prove herself. She had come for the same reason any customer would, because it was her right. The crowd reacted in waves. Some nodded with respect. Others looked down, ashamed of their earlier laughter. A few clapped quietly, the sound hesitant but sincere. The manager could not move. His legs felt rooted, his pride shattered. Every mocking word he had spoken now echoed back at him, louder, crueler, not toward her, but toward himself. He cleared his throat, struggling for control. Mrs. I didn't mean..." But his voice cracked again. He could not finish the sentence. The old woman turned away from him, uninterested in excuses. She adjusted her worn coat, lifted her bag, and stood taller than she had when she walked in. Age had bent her frame, but dignity straightened her spirit. The number still glowed on the screen, burning into every mind present. It was not just wealth. It was proof that appearances deceive, that arrogance blinds, that respect is owed to all, regardless of clothing, age, or silence. No one in that bank would ever forget it. The manager's throat tightened. His polished words, the ones he used to charm investors, scold employees, impress supervisors, were gone. He stood before the glowing screen, a fool crowned by his own arrogance. The crowd no longer laughed with him. Their eyes pierced him instead, sharp with judgment. Customers who had once smirked now crossed their arms. Others shook their heads. The silence was louder than any insult. He cleared his throat again, forcing a smile that trembled on his lips. There must have been a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Of course I didn't mean to." But his excuse collapsed under the weight of reality. The numbers were still there. Millions staring back at him, undeniable. The old woman remained steady. She did not gloat, did not raise her voice. Her wrinkled hands rested on the counter, her eyes calm but unyielding. The manager leaned forward, lowering his voice, desperate to contain the humiliation. "Please, ma'am," he said, "allow me to make this right. We can arrange premium service for you. Private banker. Exclusive benefits. Whatever you need." His words dripped with desperation. He wasn't offering courtesy, he was begging for redemption. But the woman tilted her head slightly, her expression firm, her voice steady. "Respect," she said, "has no price." The words landed like a hammer. Clear. Unshakable. The clerk at his side lowered his gaze, ashamed. The security guard straightened, his respect shifting quietly toward her. Even the child in the lobby, too young to understand the mechanics of wealth, understood the power of her tone. The manager swallowed hard. He tried again. Of course you are absolutely right. It was foolish of me. Please, allow us to serve you properly from now on." The woman did not answer. She simply adjusted the strap of her worn bag, her silence sharper than his apology. Around them whispers rose. She put him in his place. Serves him right. She didn't even raise her voice. The manager's palms grew damp. He glanced toward his colleagues, hoping for support. But they looked away, unwilling to be pulled into his disgrace. The old woman finally took a step back from the counter. She turned slightly, preparing to leave. The manager's chest constricted. He couldn't let her walk away, not like this, not with his reputation in ruins. He hurried around the counter, blocking her path with a forced smile. "Please, ma'am, if you'll give me just a moment, I can." But her eyes cut through him. Not angry, not vengeful, simply unwavering. "Step aside," she said. His breath caught. The authority in her voice was stronger than any title he carried, stronger than any suit he wore. For the first time he obeyed. She walked past him with slow, steady steps. The crowd parted, creating a silent aisle of respect. Heads bowed slightly as she moved, not because of her wealth, but because of her dignity. The manager remained behind, his body frozen, his pride in tatters. He wanted to chase her, to beg again, to erase the memory of his own cruelty. But nothing he could offer would change what everyone had seen. Respect had no price. And he had spent his. The air inside the bank felt different now. What had begun as mockery had shifted into reverence. Customers who once sneered now lowered their eyes in shame. Others looked at the elderly woman with quiet admiration, as though she had revealed not only her balance but their own blindness. The manager remained behind the counter, pale and speechless, while the old woman moved toward the exit with calm dignity. But before she reached the door, another figure appeared. The branch director, a man in his 50s with silver-framed glasses and an expensive suit that spoke of authority. He had been called from his office by whispers of the scene unfolding in the lobby. "Ma'am," the director said respectfully, hurrying toward her, "please wait a moment." The woman stopped. Slowly she turned, her expression neutral. "I am the director of this branch," he continued, lowering his tone so it carried humility rather than command. "I just learned of what happened here and I want to personally apologize. You were treated unfairly, shamefully, by my staff." The crowd shifted, curious. The manager ducked his head, sweat glistening at his temple. The old woman's eyes softened but did not waver. "An apology does not erase arrogance," she said simply. The director bowed his head. "You're right. And still, allow me to make this right. You deserve better than what you experienced here today." He gestured toward his office. "Please come with me. We can arrange private services, a dedicated banker, anything you require. This bank owes you its respect." For a long moment, the woman studied him. The crowd waited in silence, expecting her to accept the offer, expecting her to claim the privileges she had earned. But she shook her head gently. "I require nothing," she said. "Only that your staff remember what respect looks like." Her words carried more weight than any policy or contract. They sank into the silence like stone into water, rippling through every witness present. The director's shoulders dropped. He understood. He bowed slightly, a gesture of recognition, not of rank. "Then I promise you, ma'am," he said, "this lesson will not be forgotten." The woman nodded once and turned again to leave. The customers moved aside quickly, forming an unspoken corridor of honor. Some murmured blessings as she passed. Others touched their chests, humbled. A young man whispered to his friend, "She walked in invisible. She's leaving unforgettable." The manager, still frozen behind the counter, watched her go with burning shame. His arrogance had collapsed into dust. He knew his career would never escape this shadow. Every time customers looked at him, they would remember the day he laughed at a woman who carried more strength, more discipline, more wealth than he could ever comprehend. At the door, the old woman paused. She turned slightly, her eyes sweeping over the room one last time. Not to gloat, not to punish, but to remind them with her silence that dignity cannot be bought, and respect should never be withheld. Then she stepped outside into the cool air of the street. The bank exhaled. Conversations burst out, customers buzzing with disbelief. Some hurried to call friends to repeat the story before it lost its heat. Others stared at the manager, their faces twisted with contempt. The director placed a firm hand on the manager's shoulder. "You will answer for this," he said quietly. But the old woman did not hear. She was already gone, walking down the street in her worn shoes, her coat brushing against her knees, her head held higher than when she entered. She left no business card, no demand, no trace beyond memory. Yet her presence lingered stronger than marble walls, stronger than numbers on a screen. She had walked into the bank invisible. She left as a lesson carved into every soul present. The door closed behind her, and with it, the tension inside the bank dissolved into restless murmurs. Yet the silence she left behind carried more weight than the noise that replaced it. Every face turned toward the exit as if expecting her to return, though she never would. The old woman stepped into the afternoon light. The city moved around her, cars honking, footsteps rushing, voices tangled in chatter. Yet she walked in quiet contrast, steady, unhurried, untouched by the chaos. Her worn coat flapped gently in the breeze. To strangers passing her by, she was still just another elderly woman blending into the crowd. But for those inside the bank, she was unforgettable. Back in the lobby, the balance still glowed on the screen. 7,462,000.00. It was no longer just a number. It had become a mirror reflecting arrogance, exposing judgment, silencing cruelty. The manager slumped behind the counter, his mind racing. He had built his authority on appearances, on mocking weakness to appear strong. Yet in one moment, without a raised voice or a display of force, she had undone him. Her silence had been louder than his laughter. Her dignity had drowned his arrogance. The branch director stood tall, his expression grave. "This," he told the staff, "is a day we will remember. Not because of the money, but because of the mistake." His words settled like stone. Employees nodded, shame heavy on their faces. But for the customers who had witnessed it, the story was already alive, already spreading. A businessman texted his colleagues, "Never underestimate someone by their clothes." A mother whispered to her child, "Always treat people kindly no matter what they look like." The young clerk, shaken but inspired, would never again measure a client by appearances. And beyond those walls, the lesson traveled. Stories like this always do. The old woman continued her walk home, past busy shops and crowded corners. No one knew the thoughts that filled her mind. Perhaps she remembered her husband's laugh, or the neighbor's note that had taught her patience. Perhaps she thought of the pigeons waiting at the park, hungry for crumbs others ignored. Whatever it was, her steps were steady, her heart unburdened. She had not entered the bank to prove herself. She had not sought victory. She had simply demanded what was hers, respect. In the quiet of her apartment later that evening, she brewed tea and sat by the window. Outside, the city buzzed with neon and noise. Inside, she lifted her cup with wrinkled hands, steam curling against the glass. She had no need to speak of the millions in her account. She had no desire to tell the world her story. She knew the truth, and that was enough. Yet truth has a way of moving without permission. The tale of the old woman spread from mouth to mouth, from customer to neighbor, from clerk to stranger. It became an echo in coffee shops, a headline in whispers, a story parents told their children. They called her many names. The invisible millionaire. The woman who silenced arrogance. The lesson in worn shoes. And though she never sought attention, she became a symbol. A reminder carved into memory, never judged by appearances. The lesson was not about money. Money was only the stage. The real story was about dignity, patience, and the quiet strength of a life lived with discipline. The old woman's wealth had grown quietly, like roots beneath the soil, unseen by those who mocked the tree above. And when the storm came, when arrogance struck against her, those roots held firm. The manager had built his pride on shallow ground, measuring worth by fabric, by shine, by surface. The storm had torn him apart in an instant. Those who watched that day would never forget the contrast. They would remember the silence louder than the laughter. They would remember the humility greater than arrogance. They would remember the truth that respect, once lost, cannot be bought back with apologies or offers. Respect has no price. The woman lived the rest of her days much as she had before, quietly, humbly, away from the noise of recognition. Yet the memory of her presence lingered. In that bank, employees trained differently. They greeted each client with genuine care, remembering the day dignity walked in unnoticed and left as a legend. Years later, some would still whisper her story as if it had happened yesterday. Not for the shock of her fortune, but for the strength of her silence. Because sometimes the greatest wealth is not measured in digits on a screen. It is measured in the way one carries their head high even when mocked, in the way one treats others without needing to prove their worth, in the way dignity cannot be stripped away by arrogance. The old woman's tale was never written in newspapers. It didn't need to be. It lived in the minds of those who saw, in the voices of those who retold, in the hearts of those who understood. And perhaps tonight it lives in yours too. If this story moved you, let it remind you never to judge by appearances and never to withhold respect. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Respect costs nothing, but it changes everything.